I live 3 or 4 weeks in the future when it comes to the scriptures, so I have to tell you, Lori, I can tell you this now. When you and Sharon were going back and forth about the dates and whatnot, and when you said, all right, let's do it September 8th, inside I said, ugh. Because I knew the readings for today, okay? And these are not happy, joyful, end of summer, let's all get together, have a wonderful time type of readings, okay, as you've heard. The first Sunday back from vacations, we should be catching up. How was your summer? For those of you who play golf, God help you, did you have fun? You're supposed to ask me how my baseball team does, but you're not supposed to do that today. We talk about time off, time away. Yet these are Lenten readings. They're serious, they're harsh, they're demanding. This isn't about the cost of ice cream, it's about the cost of discipleship. And it's something we need to hear. So we start the reading off listening to that wonderful section at the very, very end of Deuteronomy, sort of Moses' last will and testament. And the basic line that comes out is, here it is. You got to make a choice. Choose God or die. That's the message, okay? Well, the reading that Ron read, one of the few letters that we know written by Paul in his own hand. You read that phrase, okay? He did not dictate it to anyone. And what he's doing is something so, in our culture, hopefully someday we'll be able to say this, so distasteful. He is sending someone who was visiting him as a prisoner, because this is the end of his life. He's a prisoner in Rome. Someone who has assisted him for a period of time. Onesimus was a runaway slave, and Paul is sending him back to his owner with a hope that you'll accept him as a brother and not as a slave, but only with a hope, something Paul cannot enforce. And that to me is depressing, and it makes me angry. And then Jesus says, you want to be my disciple? You got to hate all the people who you think you should be loving. Think about this. Opening words. The wandering carpenter preacher heading from Galilee to Jerusalem is very popular. Large crowds. The first time Luke says the crowds are getting larger and larger. He's giving them a message of hope. He's talking about God's love. He's building a community. He is giving them what people want to hear. You know, marketing is a science. Give people what they want to hear. Okay? And it's about using the right concepts, the right words, the right tone of voice, the right body language. You didn't have to watch many years of Mad Men on TV to see how the whole system works. And I have been to workshops where I just leave shaking my head, where people will say, the only way you will ever build a church is make sure you never say anything controversial and never say anything other than people are wonderful. Which is, of course, a lie. Starting with me. Give people what they want to hear. It works for politicians, doesn't it? What's the difference between focus and pandering? Jesus is at the height of his popularity, and he instinctively knows that the very crowd that's cheering for him now, that much noise is going to turn 180 degrees and jeer at him and call for his death. Because he says things like, you really want to be a disciple, you want to walk with me, you got to take up your cross. That's a phrase we don't get. We live in the 21st century. We have no idea of the horror that phrase meant. Those who witnessed public executions by the Romans day after day, month after month. What we know now from other documents of the time, where the poles that the crossbeam was put on, they used to leave them lining the roads, the street, entering Rome, and entering Jerusalem, so that you could see what happens to you if you step out of line. And Jesus uses this horrific image. You must deal with what God gives us, or you can't be my disciple. Not only that, he uses another phrase we don't get. He says you've got to hate the people who are most important to you. And it's not about hatred, but it's about emotional distance. It's about not being attached to those who only build you up. It's more than that. It's about not being emotionally involved. It's not being emotionally crippled. If you want to be a disciple, a follower, you have to follow. If you want to be a believer, you must believe. Jesus always gives us what we need to hear, not necessarily what we want to hear. And that's the message of today. This is about discipleship. I'm going to say something nice, Lori. I've been here almost a little over 7 years, okay? I was telling Ron Ross today, it's a little awkward for me. This is the longest I have ever lived in any one place in my entire almost 70 years. I've always been 3 years here, 4 years there, always, ever since I was a child. I think people are here and they're going to say goodbye to you today, not for a big speech, because they see in you a follower of Christ and a believer. And that is the greatest compliment I can give anyone. And I only can wish for both of you, first of all, that no hurricane ever learns your address, but over and above, that you will spend the rest of your commitment together experiencing the love of Christ in your lives together, and you continue to shine wherever the path takes you. Okay?
Right.
Amen to that. Amen. No, don't applaud. You can applaud for her later. I don't want to do that. Okay, that's about her. Those are my words. But most important for all of us, including you guys, you want to be a believer, you have to be a part of his community. You have to live the life he calls us to live. Eat of his meal, be drenched in his grace, walk his path, and be willing to pay the cost. Great German Lutheran pastor who was a martyr to the Nazis in World War II, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, had that wonderful phrase, it was the name of a book, The Cost of Discipleship. And it's a reminder that grace from God is always free. You never earn it, but it is never cheap. It always comes at a cost. What's the cost you are asked to pay? That's an answer only you and the Lord have to deal with. Are you willing to pay that cost, maybe in terms of being a disciple, so that the people who you think you love the most, you can deal with the fact that because you were a disciple, they don't love you anymore. And maybe that's what Jesus is talking about. Are you willing to pay that cost, to be a light in a world that is so dark? Are you willing to be a follower? Are you willing to be a believer? Are you willing to take up your cross?